Blessings, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. And it's a real honor for the second time, although it's been a long time since I've spoken to Gene Gomulka. And he's here again today. And just since it's been so long since we've talked, I'll just give his little bio real quick. Gene Gomulka is a retired Navy captain and a chaplain who was a priest, Monsignor, of the Altoona Johnstown Diocese, and who served an active duty in the Marine Corps and the Navy Command for over 25 years into his retirement in 2004. Awesome. Thank you, Gene.
Thank you for having me on your program.
Thank you for saying yes. With the I'm trying to think if it was my last podcast. It was. So my last podcast, and I'll post the link in the video description, was with Paul and Kristen Shaka from the Angry Catholic Show, and we did a pretty, I thought, thorough deep dive into some of Bishop Barron's writings and activities and issues and problems. I wanted to have Gene on because of his knowledge, and also because he actually wrote about Bishop Barron. This is 2019 article, so not very old. So I wanted to go over this with him as well. If you don't mind, Gene, can we just do a quick recap of a little bit of what I talked about last time? Is that okay?
Sure, please.
And then I would like to get your reaction because you're you're very honest, but you're also very knowledgeable. So let's see, share screen. Share. Can you see that, Gene?
Yes, I can.
Oh, great.
And
So,
that's Father Kolchik's church.
wow. Okay, so you know all this stuff.
Oh, I know the banner that the media made out to be a gay flag, and they try to make him out to be homophobic and
Yeah.
uh, almost psychotic.
Yeah. So I did recently interview Father Kolchak, God bless him. And that sort of got me interested in Bishop Barron because Father Kolchak was there around the same time as Bishop Barron. I think Barron is older, but that kind of got me interested in addressing some issues with Bishop Barron. And people have accused me, and I think of others, of um, you know making someone guilty by association. So Bishop Barron is from Chicago, and at the time of Cardinal Bernardine, who's quite notorious, I would say now. I think a lot since his death, a lot of truth has come out about him. But and you can confirm this, Gene, is that, I mean, apostolic succession is important in terms of the priesthood, but also in terms of bishops, who ordained you and where you went to seminary and such. So I think this is all part of Bishop Barron's story, that he came out of the pretty corrupt Catholic Church in Chicago under Cardinal Bernardine.
Well, yes, when you look at certain prelates today, to understand them, I'm almost reminded of, you remember during World War II, when the Germans were fighting the Allies, when they did a research, they looked into the background of Patton to find out how he thinks, how he behaves, what's he going to do. We did the same thing with Rommel. Well, just as you do that militarily, because that's my background, as a military chaplain, I take that same approach when I look at various priests and bishops.
Mm-hmm.
And I look at their background. Who consecrated them? Who laid hands on them? Who nominated them? And when you look at that, who promoted them? Who made them the vocation director, the vicar general, the chancellor? who's behind them, and you find that ordinarily you're not going to be promoted in this organization unless you're befriended by the person who's advancing you, and what is that relationship? What do you have in common? So that's where I think it's valid to look at someone who's been consecrated and see who is behind them. Who, for example, when you look at Dolan in Phoenix,
Mm.
in his relationship with McElroy, and should one be surprised that the people in Phoenix now are going through such a difficult time after Tom Olmsted, retired, and they're stuck now with this person who is very, very pro LGBTQ and wants to bless, gay marriages and so forth. So that's why I think it's valid when you talk about guilt by association. I think there's something to it.
I agree 100%. So here is a young Bishop Barron with Wilton Gregory. So he was also in that Bernardine circle or orbit. And of course, Wilton Gregory, I don't know what you can say about him. He was USCCB president during the Boston scandal. Advocated for that much touted Dallas charter. I think he put McCarrick involved. McCarrick was somehow involved in that. Can you believe it? Gregory put McCarrick in with sort of these reforms of the Catholic Church after the wake of that scandal. And Gregory was Archbishop of Atlanta, Georgia, quite well known for being an LGBTQ advocate in the church. And then after McCarrick's successor, Worrell, left, he went into Washington, D.C. So this is how that all works.
Well, and if you look at it, again, Washington, I was on the phone with Father Michael Breezy. Michael Breezy is a priest, even before he became a priest, was very much involved with caring for the poor and the needy and the homeless. And because of his apostolic work as a layperson, he was encouraged, to become a priest because he was doing all this priestly work, as a layperson. And he was ordained for the Archdiocese of Washington. But then, like Father Mark White, who was ordained by McCarrick, and then left Richmond because he didn't want to work for Worrell, and so the same thing with Breezy. Breezy confronted his ordinary, Wilton Gregory, and he said, "Look, I got this report from someone from Atlanta, and it disturbs me because they're calling you the African Queen." And he said, I had no idea what that meant. So I went to some of my African American friends and I said, "Can you explain that to me, what that's about?" And they said that, well, that's a derogatory term in the African American community about a gay Black person.
Of course. Yeah.
So when Father Breezy confronted, then he wrote a very, very, very respectful letter to Gregory. And he says, "Your Eminence, I'm disturbed. I received this report about you, and accusing you of calling you the African Queen. And I have to ask you, be honest with me. Have you ever engaged in sexual relations with other men?" Well, Father Breezy, is suspended now, and Wilton Gregory is leading the very, very comfortable life, while Father Breezy is living from, very, very, very humbly, I must say. I visited him in his home, and he couldn't even give me a cup of coffee. He was
Oh boy.
I did get a bottle of water from him, but these people who are suspended and canceled by people like Gregory and Supich and others, they're not really living very comfortable lives, let me tell you.
No, no. I interviewed Father Mark White. He's a good man.
Oh, they
Here,
all are. They
yeah,
Mark White, Paul Kolchik,
yeah.
Michael Breezy. You may want to consider interviewing Father Michael Breezy sometime. I mean,
Mm,
these
I will.
guys are authentic. In other words, they entered the priesthood, you know, not because they didn't like girls or because their parents forced them to become priests or they got into trouble or something. They really felt they had a vocation, a calling to follow, come follow me. And what disturbs me is that when I speak with them, when I visit with them, I'm just so distraught because these priests, these canceled priests, to me are so much like, you know, Jesus and his disciples. They are so authentic. Whereas these other people, I think, are a bunch of frauds.
Yeah, I agree. Here is a Gregory with McCarrick. Now, of course, according to them, they didn't know anything. They didn't. Barron didn't know anything. Gregory didn't know anything. Dolan didn't know anything. They all knew nothing. It was all a shock, complete shock. And I've been around Catholic prelates and actually, had conversations with them about abuse in their diocese. And when it actually, of course, hits, the media, the mainstream media, they act like they're shocked. They all know. They know everything.
Well, they're just following the lead.
Bishops know when a priest sneezes in his diocese. They know everything.
They really do. I supervised 150 chaplains serving with the Marines between Yuma, Arizona, and the Horn of Africa, which takes in about 2/3 of the world. A large diocese, you might say. And I would visit those chaplains, every one of them individually, at least once a year. I gave them, each of them had an opportunity to sit down with me privately, sit down, discuss, how's your ministry going? Is there something I could do to help, enhance your ministry, what have you? What are your concerns? So you're right, Joseph, they know what's really going on,
Hmm.
but they know too that they're part of the problem, that they are covering it up. They know that if they had to discipline their priests, they uh, would be hypocritical because their priests know that in many cases they're guilty of the same things that their priests are getting in trouble for.
Oh yeah. I was talking to one of these canceled priests once, and he said that bishops, when they get together, all they talk about is priests. And when priests get together, all they talk about is bishops. So they all know what each other is doing.
Oh, they do, but you see, this is why when I read various news reports and articles, uh, I'm looking at it not as a layperson. I'm looking at as an insider, someone who studied with Dolan, with DiNardo, with Supich, with Harvey, with Neinstead, someone who sat next to Donald Wuerl in a graduate seminar at the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas. I know them from the inside, so I know how corrupt they really are and how self-serving they are.
Yeah. Here is Bishop Barron with Cardinal Kupich, the Archbishop of Chicago, the former Archdiocese of Bernardine. Kupich is one of the proteges of McCarrick. So you don't rise in the Catholic Church unless, I hate to say it, but unless you're dirty, unless you know the secrets and you're willing to keep them and you're willing to keep quiet and cover them up.
Absolutely. They do not want someone blowing the whistle. I when I was made a Monsignor, I thought, wow, you know, somebody, they're looking all the hard work that I undertook, the accomplishments that I had over the years in the military, in serving as a priest in the diocese and then the military. Well, later on, I wondered, hold it, did they really make me a Monsignor because of my accomplishments in the priesthood and my ministry, my talents, or did they promote me thinking it would make me, want to become a bishop and then make me look the other way and compromise, my integrity and be part of the cover up? Well, it wasn't long after, it couldn't have been within a year from the time I was made a Monsignor to the time my article came out in America Magazine about when I made a passing reference to the 5 priests who were arrested and prosecuted in the military, 1 for pedophilia and 4 for homosexual predation. At that point, I was history. They realized that making me a Monsignor was a big, big, big mistake. So you're right. But you see, when it comes to Supich, when it comes to Dolan, when it comes to these other prelates who are promoted by people like McCarrick and Gregory and others, and Laurie, they're promoted because they basically are believed to be able to maintain the church's code of silence.
Exactly. And I've talked to a priest who actually was he was in grade school and high school and then seminary with someone who later became a bishop. And he had some interesting things to say, and he didn't articulate it this way, but the way that I sort of processed what he was saying is the young men are selected actually kind of early on who's going to take the bishop track. And it seems to be guys who are amendable, who are, I don't know, how would you say it, Gene? They pick out, I guess, people who go with the flow, who aren't a troublemaker in seminary, who they find somebody that's malleable.
Well, yes, but also someone who shares their sexual orientation.
Okay.
You think that Peter Harmon would have been the rector of the North American College if he and his Bishop Brian and then his successor Lucas were not close. And when I say close, I mean really close. I mean, this is look at Adam Park, who was Harmon's vice rector, who was ordained by McCarrick. And you see what happens, is that in many of these cases, these bishops, the people who are bishops now, were faculty members before. And they groomed and they preyed upon these seminarians. So if you look at someone like Wilton Gregory, and you look at these bishops today and cardinals, you will often find, if you really do like a forensic investigation, I mean, a real forensic, I mean, tracing it back, you will find that there's a connection. And trust me, you always are going to find they share the same sexual orientation.
Yeah. When I lived down in LA for a while, this is about 20 years ago, but and I befriended a seminarian at St. John's in Camarillo. He eventually left, but thank God. But one of the things he told me that I was really shocked is when one of the questions his spiritual director would ask him is he wanted details about his sexual fantasies. And I was like, well, that's none of his business. And I thought, well, this is fishing. So this priest is fishing to see, like, well, what is he thinking about? And I was like, wow, that's pretty bad. That's like like grooming or looking for dirt on somebody at a very early stage in their formation in the priesthood.
Well, there's a case recently that I was involved with involving two seminarians. Interestingly, uh, they attended St. John Paul II Seminary in Washington, D.C.,
Wow.
where the rector is Father Carter Griffin, who was also in Rome with Father Adam Park, also a priest of the Archdiocese of Washington. And both of the seminarians allege that Carter Griffin came on to them. Now, interestingly, the one was straight. He made it through there and went to the St. Mary's Seminary in Baltimore because he was studying for Baltimore, only then to be sexually harassed by a transitional deacon, Christopher Pinto, who came on to him. And again, when he reported this, it was all covered up. And in the end, they got rid of him. Okay, his name is Carl Disher. I can say that now because his even the letter that his parents wrote to Archbishop Christophe Pierre reporting this was all covered up, and they got rid of him. But they kept, Griffin is still in place, but the other seminarian who he came on to, I was informed, was not straight, but he had a homosexual orientation. But so you see, even the homosexual is going to be more prone to be approached by the gay rector or gay faculty member because he feels he has a better chance of this young man sleeping with him than if he tries to turn or come on to a straight guy.
Mm-hmm.
But then you see, if you're gay and I come on to you and I'm the rector and you turn me down, you say, well, Monsignor, you're not my type, But I'm worried that you're going to report me to the Archbishop or to the media or report me for sexual harassment. Okay. Well, what's going to happen to you next? You're going to be called into the chancery. And you know what they're going to say to you? Well, listen, we're going to have to let you go because we found out that you're a homosexual and we're worried that you might be a threat to young men in the church that you may be serving someday. Well, hold it. You're not a threat. You wanted to lead a celibate life, even though you had a homosexual orientation. You wanted to lead a celibate life. But the only reason we're getting rid of you is because you did not want to, give in to the homosexual advances of the rector. And that's what's going on today in so many seminaries as we speak.
Yes, I believe it. Now here is I believe that this was at Bishop Barron's consecration, I think you call it, in the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. And here is the notorious Cardinal Mahoney. He wasn't even supposed to be making public appearances, but he does all the time because of all of the sex abuse in the archdiocese there and his involvement in all of the cover-up. So it's kind of like everybody looks the other way and doesn't know. I guess it doesn't notice. I don't know.
Well, Mahoney was the cardinal when I was stationed at Naval Station Ventura County,
wow.
Naval Base Ventura County, north of LA, right here, a few miles from St. John's in Camarillo.
Yep. And
bad news, as of course in when he was in office, the archdiocese paid out $660 million in abuse settlements, and today, now that California has lifted its statute of limitations, the Los Angeles Times, reported that the Archdiocese of Los Angeles is facing some $3 billion in abuse cases.
Good. Well, they might have to do what San Francisco and San Diego have done and declare bankruptcy, which is really just their effort to protect church assets. So, they declare bankruptcy and
to protect their assets, but
go ahead.
also to prevent discovery.
Yes, yes.
You see, that is what they cannot afford, because you see, if I go into your records, I'm going to find out all. You see, those priests who are being sued now and so forth for abuse and so forth. There are so many more names in your file.
Mm-hmm.
And if I get discovery, if I'm the DA and I get discovery, wow, it's going to be even worse than $3 billion.
Yeah. When I was Roman Catholic, when I initially became aware of Bishop Barron, I was kind of a fan. I watched his Catholicism series and I read the book. I thought they were good. And then he was made auxiliary in the archdiocese. He was in the Santa Barbara province, which is the wealthiest and the most prestigious province there in LA. So I thought, well, that's a good sign. They put Gomez in there, and he was Opus Dei. So people were kind of like, maybe things are going to turn around in the archdiocese, because it had a very bad reputation as being very heterodox. So I had gone to the Los Angeles Religious Education Congress. I don't know if you've ever gone, Gene. Have you ever gone to
No,
that?
I've heard of it. Yes, I don't think I'd really want to go there.
Yeah,
Some of the people they've invited to speak.
you're smart.
Uh,
So I did go, and I never really went for spiritual enrichment because I knew what it was like. I was mainly reporting on the pro LGBT because it was pretty notorious for all that stuff. So I thought, well, Bishop Barron is going to start being keynote speaker at the LA Rec. Maybe that'll change. I would assume he doesn't want to share the stage or the dais, whatever, with these pro gay marriage, lesbian, trans nuns. I don't know. So, but he did. He did. So nothing really changed while he was there, except EWTN shows up, and it's kind of like puts a gloss on everything. They're kind of the shill. EWTN is there. Everything's changed. Everything's cool here. So here's Bishop Barron as one of the keynote speaker. They always gave him the big, huge auditoriums for his addresses, the largest, and they were, of course, were full, and they would sell out, and he would give a mediocre sort of uh, address. I'm just going to give you some examples of Gene. I want you to get your reaction. So, of some of the LGBT stuff that went on there during Bishop Barron's tenure at the LA Rec as the keynote speaker. So, one of the attractions they had was an art exhibit by this William Hart McNichols. He's a self-outed gay priest who paints icons. Probably his most famous work is this, called Sodomite Christ. So he's also done this drawing here. And he also did an icon of Matthew Shepard, the young man who's become a sort of a gay saint. So this is the kind of stuff he does. One of the speakers at the LA Rec on the LGBT issue was from San Francisco, and he's a member of Call to Action, which is a sort of notorious left, leaning Catholic organization, pro gay marriage, pro women ordination. Here he teaches at a Catholic school in the Archdiocese of San Francisco. I should say he used to. I think he got his PhD and he's moved on. So this was something he posted. Everyone is gay, a great big world. Happy National Coming Out Day. PSA, queer people are awesome. This is one of the presenters. And I asked Archbishop Corleone when I was still Catholic, I said, why did you, you know, why was this guy allowed to speak? He's from your archdiocese. So I kind of feel like you're a little bit responsible. He's also teaching in a Catholic school. And he said, well, I did notify the LA archdiocese that I wasn't recommending him as a speaker, but they let him speak anyway. So this is something he said. We can teach church teachings and explain the context in which church teachings is being dialogued about. The goal of teaching and church teaching on morality, in my opinion, is to help the students form their own conscience. Some people are like, oh, that's creating cafeteria Catholics. They're going to come and pick and choose what teachings they want to follow. Great. That means they are following their consciences about each of the items in the cafeteria. This is the kind of stuff that they're promoting there. Do you recognize this priest? he's kind of well known, notorious.
No.
That's Father Brian Massengill.
Hmm.
He is a professor at Fordham, of course. And he's actually self come out too as a gay priest. And he has spoken several times at the LA Rec about the gay issue. Let me tell you this picture. It's kind of funny. So there's me, there's Brian Massengale, and there's a little religious sister. She was quite nice. So he had just finished his talk, and I was outside, and a couple of people, I guess, recognized me, and this religious sister came up to me, and she was quite upset about what was being said inside. And I was like, well, it's crazy. So I said, well, I'm going to talk to him, and you can say something as well, because she was nervous. So I addressed him, and I said, this what you're saying is ridiculous. And she said something, and he was very dismissive and very patronizing, very chauvinistic towards her. Here's what he said. One of the things: the defense of children is a constant phrase we hear in gender ideology, and a constant you'll hear in transgender discussions as well. We need to defend our children. The second thing they mean by gender ideology is that your gender is something you cannot choose. And the way they do it is by simplifying the gingerbread person we had up there. By using phrases such as let girls be girls and boys be boys. Now it sounds very simple, except what exactly does it mean to be a boy? And what does it mean to be a girl? It's a very catchy catchphrase, but it doesn't tell you very much. So one of the things that he was promoting was this genderbread graphic. I don't know if you're familiar with it. Well, there's the picture that I took in the auditorium where they were displaying it. And this is in front of DREs from around the country, CCD teachers, Catholic school teachers, priests, sisters. So they're promoting this for children. And the genderbread person, here you go. There's the graphic. Well, this is from Brian Massengale again. He said, I think when a family member, oh, I can tell you, Father Gene, this was the question that was asked at this particular panel. Is it dangerous to allow very young children to transition? And what they meant by transition was, go through gender transition. So Father Massengale said, I think when a family member or a friend begins or is undergoing their transition, that we also undergo a journey of transition. That just as when a family member comes out as gay or lesbian, the whole family has to make a coming out journey. I think it's only dangerous to the child to not recognize and respect their reality. You had kids. Do you have to always respect and recognize kids' reality?
Uh, you have to understand, Joseph, when I listen to people like this and read these kinds of presentations, I have a real problem with it because, from my experience, most of the cases I'm involved with, although I deal with cases involving women who were abused, but the vast majority of the people that I work with as a sex abuse victims advocate are seminarians and priests, and I find that that when it comes to their identity and what's going on, I find that almost every case there's some form of abuse involved that move them in that direction. And it sometimes they don't know it's abuse because they were groomed. So you see, if you are 14 years old and you're in the seminary and I'm on the faculty and Joseph, how are you, buddy? Hey, do you know how to play tennis? And I teach you how to play tennis. Hey, what are you doing over? Do you want to go on a vacation? So I groom you. And then slowly, and then when you talk about, how sometimes priests, like in the seminary, ask, well, do you ever masturbate or do something like that? Well, again, slowly, I introduce you, to things that your parents really would not be very happy, to learn about that their son is doing with the priest.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't realize what's going on because you've never dated girls, you've never had these other experiences. So when this is happening, you do not see this as abuse, even though I am grooming you, even though I'm using you for my own sexual pleasure. No, you see me as your best friend in the whole world.
Yep.
So when it comes now, so when later on, when somebody confronts you and says, "Well, what are you? Are you straight or gay?" Well, no, I have a homosexual orientation. Well, then they want to say, "Well, oh, you must have been born that way." Well, hold it. You don't want to talk about, what happened to you in the seminary. And I certainly don't want you to talk about what I did to you in the seminary.
Of course.
Because I do not want people to know how I groomed you. And I want you to think for the rest of your life till you die that I'm your best friend.
Exactly. The majority of gay men experience same-sex molestation as children. That number is about 7% for straight men. Huge difference. It gets worse. They also had the mother of FTM, transgender. That would be female to male, transgender person, young minor who was in a Catholic school, and she was there to say how affirming and how wonderful the Catholic school was for her daughter who had transitioned to being a male. This woman said, this is the mother of the transgender child, there is absolutely nothing wrong or harmful with letting a child tell you who they are. You need to believe them. I think we do more harm, even with very little children, maybe even especially with very little children, when we send them the message that we can't love them for who they are. Now, it's easier to do that with a girl who doesn't want to wear dresses than with a boy who does want to wear dresses, but you can still do it. You can let a child tell you who they are. They also had, at that presentation, they had a female to male transgender person who I assume had a double mastectomy. And this person was, saying how wonderful it was that they had transitioned and how welcomed and how affirmed they are at their Catholic parish. This is
make a point about
go
that.
ahead.
You mentioned the woman, the girl with the double mastectomy.
Yeah.
I'm familiar with the case where that happened, but you know what the parents and the family and no one revealed about that particular girl?
No.
Before that happened, when she was younger, she was sexually abused.
Yes.
Now, they keep that quiet
Of course.
because they don't want to know, what impacted her. Because you see, if I'm a little girl and I'm raped by my father, let's say, okay, or my stepfather, right? Uh, that is going to affect me big time. Now, in the past, that might move some of these girls who experience that maybe later on to become lesbians.
Yeah.
But now you have this whole, they can even go farther than that. I mean, the effects of that abuse may not only move them to be a lesbian, just like a boy who is molested might move him to become a homosexual.
Yeah.
It's now moving them to want to go through this gender transition,
Yeah.
thinking that that is going to solve their problems without realizing, it only compounds the problem.
Yeah.
So don't be surprised. I know in this particular case, I hope I'm wrong because I've seen this. This young woman I'm talking about. I knew her when she was in preschool. I knew her as a little girl. So knowing, how innocent and lovely this little girl was and where she is today, I'm really honestly fearful that within so many years or whatever, she may take her life.
Hmm.
If she takes her life, it's not going to be because people were not affirming her. It's because
Because she was abused.
yes, exactly. But you see, we want to make an excuse. Oh, well, she was born that way. This is genetic. Nobody wants to talk about what really is happening, the grooming and the abuse that is going on.
No, I agree. I agree. There's a bit of a conspiracy in with the psychiatric field, I think, with pedophiles, is because I went through this even in the 80s. Is it when a child is having, noticeable mental health problems, if a psychiatrist, delves a little deeper and finds out maybe that the boy or girl has same-sex attraction, well, they will automatically ascribe those mental health issues to some sort of minority stress, that your family's not accepting, or your peers are not accepting, or that your religion is not accepting. But like when I was a kid, they never asked me if I had been sexually abused, and I had been sexually abused by a priest. And then, but you're right, they ascribe all these things to some other cause, but they don't want to go there, because if they go there, then the whole house of cards falls. You're not born gay. It's primarily trauma based. So, but this is the kind of stuff they're pushing, under Bishop Barron's auspices. This was a priest who also addressed the LA Rec on the LGBT issue. He's a priest of the Archdiocese of San Francisco. His name is Chris Ponnet, and he does, these Pride LGBT June masses, there in the Archdiocese. And this is what he said. It actually, this was the impetus for me, because I had already spoken to Archbishop Gomez and they played dumb. I'd spoken to him personally at the LA Rec, and he played completely dumb. He had no idea. The Church of Satan could have been presenting at the LA Rec and he wouldn't have known it. He just didn't know anything. That's what he said. So when I went to this presentation by this priest, I had to get up and I had to start writing letters. And this is what the priest said. Part of our question as we walk this journey is, do we understand what this is about, sexual identity? The way in which a person sees themselves, and in terms of who they are, romantically and sexually attracted to. Now, some people don't even have that when they are 50 years old. We know that some people, as second and third graders, have that, and they begin to identify with either what is normative or, from their perspective, what is normative. And they dress different from what you expect. They speak differently, and they identify themselves in a world that is unto themselves. And we are called to journey with them and affirm them in that journey. When I heard that, And he got more detailed later. When I heard that this is a blueprint for abusing a child, you're recognizing a certain child as being different, you're identifying them, you're befriending them, and you're affirming them. And I said, this is what in the Archdiocese of LA, this is what they're publicly stating. They're teaching people how to groom and abuse a child. And I said,
And it's
this,
the
and I said,
priests.
this is sick.
But you see, Joseph, it's these priests who themselves are being part of that community, are looking for some type of self-affirmation to say this is normal, this is fine, because they're frustrated, especially they know most of them are living in the closet and they know what the official teachings of the church are in regard to homosexuality and homosexual behavior. And they know that while the church does not uh, condemn, a person because of one's orientation. I mean, if I'm straight and I'm or gay, okay. But now, if I'm straight and I come and visit you and you're married, and I try hitting on your wife while you go out to get the milk, then you have a problem with my orientation. It's just not my orientation.
Yeah.
Or if you're gay and I leave and you try to hit on my son, then there's a problem. So the
Yeah.
church has always made it clear, has always made that distinction between orientation and behavior.
Mm-hmm.
But it has never viewed the behavior as moral and as normal.
Mm-mm. Mm-mm. And of course, James Martin was there speaking about the LGBT issue. Um, this was something he was invited to the World Meeting of Families in, I believe it was in Ireland, Dublin, I think, in 2018. And this was an advertisement for an event that he spoke at. James Allison is a pretty notorious gay Catholic priest, self-outed. So I'm not saying anything that these people don't. What was troubling to me was this graphic of a child's hand and this adult hand with the LGBT flag here and this Vatican
Vatican.
flag here. It's really disturbing. So I think what I was trying to demonstrate here with the stuff at the LA Rec is that I think they're actively and openly grooming children, or at least promoting it. And I guess Bishop Barron doesn't have a problem with it. So,
I could not agree with you more. I mean, I believe that so uh, many problems that young people have today, involve grooming.
yep,
When my, years ago, if parents had children, they went off to high school.
yep,
In the past, parents were worried if you had a son that he might get a girl pregnant, or if you had a daughter that your daughter would get pregnant in high school. But today, you have to really worry about your son or your daughter being groomed
okay,
and without realizing that he or she is being used, you know, and abused.
yep. One of the things that was disturbing to me is that at one of the LA Recs, they have a large, um, I don't know what you call it, the convention area, where it's mainly, different religious orders set up booths and Catholic retailers, and it's a huge, huge space. They had the LGBT uh, uh, ministry of the LA Archdiocese, where they had the gay flags and everything, right next to the Boy Scouts of America booth. I was like, okay, what else? It's pretty obvious what they're trying to do here.
I'm not surprised that with that connection, when I was working in Washington, I befriended Dr. Judith Reisman.
Oh
Are
yeah.
you familiar with her?
Yes, she was great. God rest her soul.
Well, I mean, I asked her. I said, "Look, I'm working on this. I'm tasked with examining the Department of Defense homosexual exclusion policy, and I understand like you are a real expert when it comes to these matters." I said, I can't afford to pay any consulting fees, but I said, I like to cook and I can actually make a pretty good meal. How about if I came over to your home and made you dinner, and then maybe you could share some of your research with me? She says, no one has ever asked me that before, like to do with that. Great, come on over. So I went over. It was an incredible encounter with her, but I can still remember when she warned the Boy Scouts, when she said, look, aren't you guys familiar with this institution called the Catholic Church? Aren't you familiar with all the lawsuits that they have been facing when they increased, when they started, accepting homosexuals into the priesthood? Don't you know that there's a direct correlation between, the number of homosexual priests and the amount of abuse in the Catholic Church? She said, why, knowing that, would you want to put yourself in a similar position with the Boy Scouts? You're going to find yourself, in a lot of, hot water in the future. Well, of course, they didn't listen to her. And what do you have? Over 100,000 lawsuits against the Boy Scouts who filed for bankruptcy.
I know this is anecdotal evidence, but I know some survivors who were abused in the Boy Scouts when they were boys. And there's a correlation here that a lot of times these troops that had abuse were attached in some way to either a Catholic parish or a Catholic school. Because I was never in the Boy Scouts, I was in the Cub Scouts, but I remember at my Catholic school, the troops sometimes were attached to a school, or a parish. So that was a problem. This is from Bishop Barron's 2017 book, To Light a Fire on the Earth, Proclaiming the Gospel in a Secular Age. And here he's talking about how Pope Francis has shifted the focus on a lot of social issues. Here, what does he say? From the sexual issues to things like immigration, the poor, the environment, and how Bishop Barron agrees with that shift in emphasis. To me, it's kind of like, well, they don't want to address, and you talk about this in your article about what Bishop Barron had to say about sex abuse, and I think they don't want to address their own problems. So here's Bishop Barron. I always thought that was an odd picture. I thought I'd show it. And this Bishop Barron has really made inroads into what used to be called the IDW, the intellectual dark web. I don't know what it's called now. It's kind of a loose affiliation of like red-pilled, based people like Jordan Peterson and who's the other, the Daily Wire people, and who else? Lex Friedman. So he's made his way into these podcasts that are mainly appealing to young men, which I think is kind of planned that way. And I don't know what to say about that. So I don't think it's a good idea. So I want to talk to you. I know I've kept you for a while, Gene, but I want to talk to you about this article that you wrote in 2019, and it's called A Response to Bishop Robert Barron's Letter to a Suffering Church. So I addressed this letter with the Shakas in the previous podcast, but I wanted to reiterate a couple of points, and you talk about one of these points in the article as well, your article. This was something from Bishop Barron's essay book, whatever, I don't know what he was hawking it on his website, So Bishop Barron said this about the abuse crisis and what Catholics could do, presumably survivors as well. He wrote, "Fight by raising your voice in protest, fight by writing a letter of complaint, fight by insisting that protocols be followed, fight by refusing to be mollified by pathetic excuses." Well, I did all of those things, wrote letters, did everything, followed all the protocol, never got an answer except I got, dragged and blocked by him on social media and he's fought. Bishop Barron has a very aggressive, very defensive team around him. And before I had even contacted them, they had threatened me through social media that I need to stop, I guess, talking about Bishop Barron in a less than favorable way. So he's a hypocrite. So,
well, again, the problem with his admonitions in that little book, as you know, you've tried all those things, all those approaches, and I the analogy I always use is you're wasting your time. It's like when people try to appeal to canon law or write to the Vatican. Well, it's like if you lived in Germany and the Gestapo were to take your parents off and take them off to a concentration camp, and you said, "Well, I'm going to resolve this. I'm going to appeal," and you write to Adolf Hitler or Heinrich Himmler, and I would say, "Are you nuts, Joseph? Joseph, you know, you're writing to the very person, who's behind all this." So when people appeal to the Vatican, you're appealing basically to people who are no better, in many cases worse
worse.
than the person
Who
you are
abuse?
reporting in your own local area.
Exactly.
Remember who said it never happened in my diocese? If the Pope, when he was the Archbishop of Buenos Aires,
Not one case.
2.7 million Catholics, not one abuse case. Hello.
Well, you set up my next point perfectly. Thank you, Gene. Why people put faith, even survivors, why they put faith in the institution is because of what Bishop Barron said in that letter that really offended me. And he said this: "There is simply never a good reason to leave the church. Never. Good reason to criticize church people, you bet. But grounds for turning away from the grace of Christ in which eternal life is found. No, never, under any circumstances." So I was offended by this because I did give it a shot in the Catholic Church. I mean, I tried. I tried to be an advocate for survivors and victims, and you just get mowed over again, but you can't leave. You can't leave. We can beat you, hit you, spit on you, and you got to ask for more. That's being a good Catholic. And I was like, no, no, because most survivors has said, if I stay in the Catholic Church, I'm going to lose my faith. Not just my faith in this institution, but my faith in God. I got to get out. I don't know any survivors that have stayed.
Well, I know very, 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 very few. And also whistleblowers like myself. In other words, I had a hard time. If I have to pray, let's say, let us pray for Francis, our Pope, and Robert McElroy, our Bishop. Well,
Ugh.
hold it. I know how much abuse they covered up. I know that Robert McElroy covered up the rape of Rachel Mastrogiacomo. I know that when Richard Sipe presented McElroy and the Pope, he didn't give it to McElroy because Richard Sipe knew that only the Pope could discipline McCarrick, not McElroy. So when he had McElroy legally served, the evidence showing that McCarrick sexually abused 12 seminarians and young priests. that what happened? Nothing. It was all when you talk about appealing. So how do you think Richard Sipe felt? How do you think these parents feel whose sons are tossed out because they report abuse? Today they want nothing. One woman who was a lay Dominican, whose son, who was the one I spoke of, who was abused, in Washington and Baltimore. She was a devout lay Dominican. They prayed the rosary as a family together. But I got to tell you, I don't want to scandalize your listeners out there, but many of these devout families in the past, whenever they were in their car, they were driving past the church, they would make the sign of the cross. And you know what they do now when they go past the church?
Yeah, I can imagine.
They're not making the sign of the cross. They're using their hand, but not the sign of the cross.
Well, the thing is that I've heard this from a lot of survivors, is that those in the church will use the victim's faith against them, saying things like, you can't leave Jesus because of Judas. If you attack the church, you're attacking the body of Christ. They use all this stuff. If you leave the Catholic Church, you're going to hell. You're not saved. They use all this stuff. So it shuts people up. And what I even did too is that, I got so messed up in my own head, is that I was covering up my own abuse because I felt like if I talk about it, it's going to hurt the church, or it's going to hurt the traditional movement, which I believe in. So I'm not going to say anything. And a lot of priests do that as well. I've heard from priests, and I don't think they're evil people, but they'll say, well, Joe, I know A, B, and C, but if I reveal these things, I'm going to be kicked out of the church. So they're like, well, they're kind of like weighing it. I'm doing a lot of good in the church, so I'm going to stay quiet in order to keep doing those things that I want to do and that I feel that God has commanded me to do. So I'm going to stay quiet.
The problem, Joseph, is too that priests are poor. I mean, for the most part, remember when I told you Mahoney came to speak to the priest in Ventura? It was on that occasion they changed the retirement plan. And he said, we've decided that when you retire, you cannot make more money than you are currently making as a priest. Well, the problem is that, you see, when you retire and you're no longer living in the rectory, you no longer have room and board. Mm-hmm. And what are the major expenses that we have in life? A home and food. Yep. And so, you see, if you keep the priest poor,
yep,
you can control them. And so a lot of these priests who are good priests, who are not part of the problem, who are not abusing people, they know and they see what happens to people like Strickland, yep, and Kolchak and White.
Yes,
and
exactly.
And they see, look, I don't want to be living in the street. Yeah. And they will be living in the street. They will be living in the street. And what do you do with a theology degree or a philosophy degree?
You're not going to teach it.
You're going to be poor, and you can't. You're going to be thrown out. Now, Father Tom Doyle and myself, who were canceled, we were fortunate because as military chaplains, we have a retirement because we stayed 20 years.
Good for you.
So when they threw us off the trapeze, we landed in a net. But these priests, diocesan priests and so forth, who work in those parishes, they have no net. When they're thrown out, they don't have a retirement. They don't have health benefits. And they're going to be hurting, really.
Yep. You wrote this in that article about Bishop Barron. He writes that the reporting of new cases is down to a trickle. that you quoted him. The fact is, however, that reporting doubled between July 1st, 2017 and June 30th, 2018. Even though he laments the abuse and cover-ups, he fails to address the fact that it is the Catholic Church and not simply predator priests and corrupt bishops that is responsible for the abuse problem. Why should one want to blame the problem on the Catholic Church? ? It's also interesting that about only 16% of male sex abuse survivors ever report. So it's not a lot. And they tend to do so. This is kind of surprising, but it was that way in my life. They tend to report much later.
Decades later. Absolutely.
Yes. So, I mean, the people that were abused, let's say in the 90s and the O's, the 90s, they might just start reporting now.
Well, exactly. Now, are you familiar with Father Paul Sullins?
No, I'm not.
Father Paul Sullins is a married former Episcopal priest. Okay, he lives near Catholic University, where he worked as a sociologist. Okay, and in 2018, in November, that was the meeting at the USCCB when the bishops were going to vote on having some, controls put in place that will discipline bishops who are abusive. And remember, it was at that meeting that Supich said, well, the Holy Father doesn't want us to address this at this meeting because he's going to hold a summit in the Vatican in February. So let's put off this vote. Well, at that same meeting, Father Paul Sullins presented the bishops with his very, very, very detailed sex abuse report, which showed a direct correlation between the increase in the number of homosexuals in the priesthood to the increase in the number of abuse victims. Now, years later, we were talking, and he was under the impression that, look, the number of homosexual priests in the priesthood are going down. And I said, Paul, why do you think that? He says, well, look, the number of abuse cases are going down. I said, Paul, how can you say that? I said, Paul, he said, look at the chart. And he showed me the USCCB bishops chart. Well, the bishops showed, a decrease after 1980. Well, the problem is that, as you say, it takes decades, 10, 20, 30, 40, sometimes 50 years ordinarily before the abuse is reported. So I said, Paul, the bishops can't say that abuse is going down because it won't be noted until another 30 or 40 years. And then, exactly. But guess what? He says, you know what? I think you're right. So if you go on his website today and you look at the chart, you'll see he doesn't project it out like the bishops did. He recognizes that we cannot say, in fact, that abuse is going down.
But that is the pat answer, because Barron, the interesting thing about Bishop Barron is that I think he's very selective about what interviews he does. I mean, he won't talk to a pre-sex abuse survivor like me. I'm sure he won't talk to you. And I've talked to some other more, objective, Catholic podcasters. He won't talk to them. He's pretty selective about who he talks to. And most of the time, 9 out of 10 times, they don't ask him about the pre-sex abuse issue. Now, one time they did with Lex Friedman, and he does give that pat answer, which you addressed here, is that it's been taken care of. Safeguards have been put in place since the Dallas Charter. The abuse is going down, and it's been addressed, and it's over. Like Gregory, I always quote, I always, whenever I see anything on Gregory on social media, I put his famous quote, "The scandal is history." And that was from 2004. He said, "The scandal is history. It's over. We're done addressing it." So that's what they say. This is another quote from your article. "The even greater elephant in the room that neither the media nor the U.S. bishops, including Bishop Barron, want to expose is the amount of abuse that Pope Francis himself covered up in Buenos Aires prior to his papal election. How can the Pope discipline bishops for covering up or underreporting sex abuse when most bishops know he himself covered up innumerable abuse cases in his archdiocese with a population of 2.5 million Catholics?
Well, and again, that's why when he could not, remember, he could not discipline McCarrick. He let McCarrick roam around the world to China and all over. Why? Because he knew that McCarrick knew that he was also alleged to have been involved with novices and seminarians sexually in Argentina, especially in Cordoba. So how can if I'm your bishop, and let's say you're a priest, let's say you are have a girlfriend, okay, and you're carrying on an affair with her, and everybody knows it. You go out restaurants, you're seen together, but if you have some dirt on me, and if you know that I'm sleeping with this guy or this woman, how can I discipline you when you have the goods on me? So it's an issue of blackmail. So the problem with the Pope, there are how many bishops? Are you ready for your quiz? How many bishops, according to bishopaccountability.org, have been credibly accused in the world of abusing either minors or vulnerable adults? 150. How many, Joseph, have been laicized to date? 7.
Okay.
7.
Wow. Oh, I'm
7.
surprised. Okay.
7. And McCarrick is the 7th one. But you see, some people think, oh, well, at least McCarrick was laicized. No. What most people don't realize is that only the Pope can conduct a trial for a cardinal, can stand in judgment of a cardinal. You see, but the problem is this. Bergoglio, Pope Francis, could not convene that trial because he knew that McCarrick knew about him. And so that's why it was much easier to get rid of him, to laicize him, and then to have a sham of a trial.
Exactly. This is your last quote here. As long as there are so many corrupt prelates in the highest positions of the Catholic hierarchy, can Bishop Barron really expect matters to improve no matter how hard Catholics fight? Like he was saying, fight, fight, fight. And, I was pretty naive when I was in the Catholic Church, and I really thought that maybe one person could make a difference, or even maybe a group of people like survivors if they organize. And I think they can in a small way, but it's not through church channels. The way that victims and survivors have made a difference is through the secular courts. That's how they've been able to do it. If you try to work within the hierarchy, as Bishop Barron said, fight, you're not going to get anywhere. You're not going to get anywhere. I mean, as an example of this, it's like priests won't say anything. Bishops won't, well, except for Bishop Strickland, but look what happened to him. So, like I interviewed a priest on my podcast, a good priest, and I would say a courageous priest. Afterwards, he was kind of like, you know what, Joe, this section of the interview you need to redact. I go, oh, fine, I don't care. But I was kind of like, well, why? Because that was me speaking. He actually didn't respond. And I was saying something about James Martin. And the priest said, just me being here and listening to that will cause me a lot of problems with my bishop.
And look at all the priests who are in that position today. People, again, like Mark White, whom you interviewed.
Yeah.
And here, and isn't it interesting, Joseph? Mark White was the pastor of two rural Virginia parishes where half the members of the congregation were poor Hispanics.
Yep.
I mean, you talk about someone doing the Lord's work and working and bilingual, taking care of these people, loving them, but then very disturbed by what he saw going on in the church, and knowing too what he knew about McCarrick, Worrell, and the Pope. And when you know these allegations, which are not being reported oftentimes either by the secular media or news services like Catholic News Agency or Catholic News Service, yeah, people don't know this. So when Mark White on his blog, uh, broadcasts the truth, he's a threat and he has to be removed. He has to be silenced. You talk about, how the Germans or the Soviets, silenced, dissidents. Well, this is what's happening today. And just ask someone like, Joseph Strickland.
Yeah. When, on social media, at last, I interviewed Bishop Strickland, a good man. Um, you know, mainly a lot of traditional Catholics were cheering Bishop Strickland on, especially on Twitter, because Bishop Strickland was pretty active on Twitter. That's what got him in trouble, I think. And I was like saying, this is not going to end well for Bishop Strickland. I could see it years ago because I said, I know priests who have spoken out and who have a much smaller platform, and the iron boot comes down on their neck. And I go, this is not going to end well for Bishop Strickland. And it didn't, because I don't know, I'm trying to be charitable. Well, this is what Bishop Barron said about James Martin. And James Martin is evil. He said, Father Martin is a winsome guide to all those who want to deepen their friendship with the Lord. So Bishop Barron says what he needs to say to get ahead and to survive in the church. He's not going to say the truth about anything.
Well, I actually, that's why when I wrote that article, it reminded me of McCarrick in 2002, when he was saying, well, the church has to do something about these homosexuals. We should not ordain them. We should not allow them. This is McCarrick. Or the same thing in 2005, when Archbishop Edwin O'Brien, who was tasked by the Vatican to do a study of seminaries in the United States, said, we should not be ordaining and accepting homosexuals. Well, remember, Rod Dreher wrote that article afterwards, quoting those two young men, two homosexuals from the Courage Conference, who when they read what O'Brien was quoted as saying in the Catholic Register, said, hold it. This is the same guy who knew we were homosexuals, who tried to recruit us to become priests of New York and become military chaplains. One hand, he says we shouldn't take them. Next thing, he's doing it. So Barron, McCarrick, O'Brien, even the Pope, it's all double speak.
Well,
They're playing for their listeners. They want to say the right things. They don't want to offend people, and they want to come off as, they still want to hide who they really are.
well, even if the bishops don't want to accept people who are openly homosexual into the seminaries, they've got a big problem right now, because what heterosexual guy would want to be a Catholic priest right now? And I think Bishop Barron, if you look at some of his online persona, he's trying to project this image of masculinity, I think sometimes by surrounding himself with bodybuilders. But I think it
that backfires.
it's backfired, and it just looks bad, and it looks desperate, and it looks not cool. So I mean, the Catholic Church they have a big problem. They're not going to attract what I think what you and I would describe as good candidates for the priesthood, because I don't know what's attractive there. And there was a seminarian, and I'm gonna let you go because I've kept you too long. What worries me as well is there was a seminarian that used to um, email me, and because I had been real outspoken, and I had talked to you about the problem in the Catholic seminaries, and he was writing to me about the issues that he had in his seminary, which which were homosexual, and the gaslighting and the lying and the persecution that he was enduring. And he was wanting to leave, and he was describing how he was so committed to being a priest and wanting to be a priest. It was something that he had thought about since he was a kid. It's all he ever wanted. And he believed that he was doing God's will. And because I was like, I think you need to leave, because he sounded mentally unstable to me, this young seminarian. I said, you need to leave. I said, you have people to go with. Can you go to your parents? Can you go to your friends? But he was so committed to this goal of being a priest that he would not leave. And then I hope he's well. Then he stopped corresponding with me, because I just said, you need to leave. But it worries me even about the people that are attracted to the priesthood at this point, and the people that go through the seminary process, that there's so much gaslighting, and there's so much brainwashing, and there's so much uh uh just abuse. I worry about the people that go through that, because I don't think they're going to be well on the other end. And I've seen priests that came out of seminaries who were conservative and were sort of able to get through it. And they came out damaged. They really did. They weren't well. And I think, and I saw it in their relationships with their bishops, which was abusive. And I was like, this is not good for two men to be treating each other this way. And I eventually, some of them, it eventually drove them nuts. So,
Well, as I told you earlier, most of the people I deal with are either seminarians or a priest who were either abused or reprised against for reporting abuse, and uh, the, most of my work, centers really on seminaries, and everything you just said about your concerns about what they have to go through. But it would be like, if I invited you to go with me to a gay bar, would you assume that I'm gay?
sure.
Okay. Now, how would you feel if you're straight and we're in this gay bar? Would you feel comfortable?
No, no, of course not. No.
Now, how does the straight guy today feel in a Catholic seminary? How does a Catholic priest feel in a diocese? Now, the only thing that offsets him today is the fact that in some dioceses, like LA, half the priests in LA today are foreign born. But the other half, vast majority of them are gay. And so if he's not foreign born and he grew up in a Catholic parish in the United States, he goes off to the seminary, even if he makes it through the seminary, how many friends is he going to have in the priesthood? Is he going to be promoted? Is he going to be made the vicar general someday, or the superintendent of schools, or recognized for his work? Or is he going to be treated like Father Mark White and Father Paul Kolchik? That's what awaits these guys. And so you're absolutely right in being worried about what the future holds for any young heterosexually oriented seminarian who thinks if he could just make it through the seminary, that everything's going to be smooth sailing, and it's not. It's only
No.
going to be is as lonely, and you know what happens when people get lonely, the escape mechanisms, drugs, the sex, the alcohol,
Yeah.
whatever, and so it doesn't really set them up for success.
And even if you're even if the sexual orientation issue is not a problem with this person, if they are a squeaky wheel in any way, you're gonna, because I know priests who have seen problems in dioceses, and they're not necessarily um, of a sexual nature. Sometimes they're uh, alcohol abuse or financial problems or just abusive situations between other priests. If you start reporting any of that, you're going to have problems as well.
Well, oftentimes these issues, these problems,
Yeah.
are not, separate. I mean, you have financial problems. I can't tell you the number of cases of priests who were found to have uh, a priest in Greenwich, Connecticut, who was a Navy Reserve chaplain, I know, was later on removed. He was found in Greenwich has money. Let me tell you, it's a wealthy area, and he was supporting a gay lover in Manhattan with an apartment and everything. So oftentimes they lead double lives, but to be able to lead those double lives, they need financial support, and oftentimes even with what they're making, it's not enough. So they dip into the church funds.
Yeah.
But again, too, if you are looking for a place to hide, you can lead a very closeted, very comfortable life in this parish, and you expect people to feel that, look, you've given up a wife and children to follow our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, Father. You're sacrificing this to serve us. No, 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 hold it. I'm looking for a nice place. I can get these vacations. I could go to Myrtle Beach. I could go to Mykonos once a year. I could even take, Father so-and-so, my boyfriend, with me. And the people will say, oh, isn't it nice? Father
Yeah.
John and Father Bill are going away on a vacation together.
Of course. Though I want to address this one thing, I wasn't going to talk about it, but you mentioned it with a large number of foreign-born priests, but not only in the United States. I've heard from people that I know in Europe that that's the case over there as well. Is that um, a lot of times these foreign-born priests will serve their native populations that are in that country, and what I have heard is that those sort of communities are have a great propensity towards abuse, especially in the United States, because you have the Hispanic community that is sometimes being served by a Hispanic priest. And there's a language barrier, of course, but then there's also just an unwillingness to report such things to authorities, because if you're here illegally, you're not going to report. And also, especially in Latin American cultures, there's an immense amount of support and reverence towards the church and also the priesthood. So I think the Catholic Church in the United States has been very crafty, because they know they've lost the native-born population. They've abused their children too much, and people have had enough. So in the United States, the Catholic Church touts that it's growing, but it's growing because of immigration. And I think they've also found a community where they are going to be able to prey upon children more easily. And I think that's a big problem. So
Sex trafficking is a major problem in the Catholic Church today. The abuse victim whom I'm working with here in upstate New York was recruited to work as a priest with a Polish community in the United States. And what he found interesting was when he went to this hotel, to be interviewed.
A hotel,
To be,
a hotel.
well, it was a hotel. They set up this place to have to meet with him. Okay, it wasn't a rectory, it wasn't a chancery. He went to this hotel,
Oh,
and when he went to the hotel, in the end, he was accepted. He said, "Well, you're smart. You'll be able to. You speak Russian, German, French, and Polish, so you'll
wow.
be able to learn English pretty easily.
Yeah.
You're smart. You get great grades. Well, so and everyone said, guess what? You will be so successful. You'll maybe be a bishop one day in the United States." So he's accepted. He says, you're accepted. We're going to find you a diocese in the United States. Well, then before you go, we need to take some pictures of you.
Oh my God.
What he found interesting was they were taking full length pictures of him from 4 different angles. Now he couldn't understand. He said, "Why? Why are you taking all these pictures of me like this?" He says, "Well, when you get off the plane, then people will be able to recognize you." And then he thought to himself, he didn't say anything. He thought, well, hold it. How are they going to recognize me from my rear end? So he immediately, then he thought, well, hold it. Later on, years later, when he was being hit on and ultimately abused twice while he was in the United States before they got rid of him, he realized that, hold it, had he been fat or bald, he was young, good looking, fit, he worked out, but very heterosexual, mind you. He had a girlfriend even before he went to the seminary, but because he knew that being a priest would require celibacy, they did not become sexually involved, because he said if he could not lead a celibate life beforehand, how could he do it afterwards? But the point is that he found himself sex trafficked, and then he ended up in Buffalo. Now remember, Buffalo
Oh,
Buffalo recruited when Mansell was here. Mansell worked with Father Gatto, who was the seminary rector, who was later on relieved for hitting on seminarians. Bishop Mansell, before he went to Hartford, developed the Columbian pipeline. Interestingly, that time, they recruited 15 from Columbia.
hmm.
Now, but get this, of those 15, almost all of them left. They were straight. They left. A lot of them joined the military, American military, to facilitate becoming American citizens, right? One
Good.
of them, one of them was openly gay. You know, he became, you know, uh, he became young meat for one priest, and in the process of their encounter, they had to take him to the hospital to have his rectum worked on
Hmm.
because of the damage that was done. But the point is that they sex trafficked these kids. But then once they got here, they realized, hold it, they're not going to be young meat for these gay priests.
Yeah, I've noticed that there's a large number of dioceses in the United States who have, numerous seminarians that were imported from other countries. And yeah, it is worrisome for these young men because especially if they came from an impoverished background. So they're leaving their home country, they're here in the United States, so they're really vulnerable at that point. I mean, they probably don't want to be sent back, but they're also just in a different country. So they're much more vulnerable than I would think maybe a native born seminarian would be. So,
Well, I'm dealing right now with an Italian seminarian from Italy who whose English wasn't that great. Okay, he's learning English, but he was abused by the rector of his seminary. He reported it, interestingly, immediately to the police in Brooklyn. But guess what the police did? They called up DiMarzio this time. DiMarzio, of course, who himself was accused of abusing 2 people, confronts him and says, "Why did you report it to the police?" Well, he abused me. He should be in jail.
Exactly.
DiMarzio threw him out of the seminary and then sent a notice out throughout the diocese: do not take this kid in.
Yeah.
Of course, they did not want him talking about what happened to him in the seminary.
Yeah. Mm.
And remember, DiMarzio, who did he put in charge of the safe environment program of the Brooklyn diocese?
I don't know.
Monsignor Otto Garcia.
Oh, well.
The same guy who came into the North American College when I was there, started massaging me in my room when I was studying for my finals.
Great.
And this is, so they put in, the fox in charge of the hen house.
Exactly. I'm going to try to bring this full circle. So we started to talk about Bishop Robert Barron. He's been called America's bishop by a lot of people. He's been compared to, he's probably turning over in his grave, the late Archbishop Sheen, but he really is the most, I would say, well-known bishop in the United States. And for all intents and purposes, he is the face of the Catholic Church in America. Now, I think what me and Jean have talked about, there's some really serious, deep, ongoing issues in the Catholic Church, especially dealing with the abuse crisis. And has he really done anything to help reform the church? No, he hasn't. Because I think it's clear that if you become too vocal, something like Bishop Strickland is in your future. So I think it's impossible to reform the church from within. This is my opinion. And I think you can't look at somebody like Bishop Barron, who presents himself well, and say, well, he's, doing his best, or he's trying to clean up the church. No, he's probably just a cog in the wheel, and he's part of the problem. So that's how
again, when I wrote that article, again, I tried if you notice, I started off by showing the good things that he wrote in the article.
Yeah.
Because when you started reading that, you say, "Oh, he's defending Barron. He's writing this article saying what a great bishop he is." But then, as I continued on, then I couldn't help but try to show that, look, he's talking a good line, and a lot of people were taken. Oh, what a wonderful bishop he is! What what direction he's giving. But I'm saying, it's all smoke and mirrors. There's no substance to this. This man is not addressing. He's dealing with symptoms. He doesn't want to confront the causes of, and that's, remember what Bishop Strickland did in November of 2018 when he addressed the bishops and said, "Hey guys, we have a problem." And when you see, any time when you address the fact that the church today has an overwhelming number, with the majority of bishops, priests, and seminarians today are homosexuals, immediately you become a threat, and you have to be gotten rid of, because people like Barron and Supich and Tobin and McElroy and Dolan and others do not want to be outed. They do not want to be confronted for who they really are.
Of course. And I think Barron knows full well that the Roman Catholic Church is a top-down organization, but they try to pretend that the priest abuse crisis was a bottom-up, that you had some renegade priests who, got out of control or whatever, bad priests, and that's sort of infected upward. No, this all started from the beginning. And I think you rightly point that out in the article, that, I mean, I would argue that there were other pontiffs. I mean, we know about Pope John Paul II and his problems with the Legionnaires of Christ. And now we also know about Benedict and the problems that he was having with McCarrick. So I don't think it's exclusive to Francis, but I think you point that out. That
We do, and that's why even just today, because I'm fortunate because I'm getting the longer the more I write, the more input I'm getting from all over the country. I'm getting information from people. Today, someone reminded me that this young man spoke with Bishop Weekland, Archbishop Weekland. Remember who got in trouble in Milwaukee? He showed, and this was reported by Marcin Gutowski in that documentary that he released in Poland. According to him, Weekland in 1978, before Karol Wojtyła, whom I knew as a cardinal, whom I met in Rome, and who was in office when I was made a Monsignor, okay? Weekland, according to that source, in 1978, Weekland informed Karol Wojtyła about Theodore McCarrick. So not only did Archbishop Vigano say that he informed Francis in 2013 of McCarrick, but we have now Weekland saying that in 1978, even before Wojtyła became Pope John Paul II, that he informed him of McCarrick. So the problem is, yes, all the evidence shows that all three, as you're right, all three of the last pontiffs have covered up abuse. Not just Francis.
No. So thank you. I could keep talking, but thank you, Gene, for taking so much time to discuss this topic with me. Although I'm not Roman Catholic anymore, I'm Orthodox. I still have a heart for the Catholic. I'm not going to say the Catholic Church. I have a heart for Catholics because there's a lot of good people there. I think there's some good priests. I met a good bishop. I think Bishop Strickland's a good guy, but I just I wish everyone well. I do. To me it doesn't look good. I especially in the hierarchy, I don't think there's any good guys because the reason they're there, they're not a good guy, or they wouldn't be there. Now, occasionally, I guess a Strickland will that's a fluke. We'll get through, but he was taken care of in short order. So if they're there, they know something, and they ain't talking.
And if they do, they'll be treated like Dermot Martin. Do you know Dermot Martin?
No.
Dermot Martin was at my diaconate ordination at the North American College in 1973 in Rome. He was at that point a just newly ordained priest, Irish priest, okay? But he spent most of his priesthood working as a diplomat for the Vatican because he's very gifted linguistically. He worked in a Swiss-German parish in Lucerne. So he's fluent in French, German, Spanish, Italian, English. So he spent most of his life working as a diplomat. But when everything exploded with the abuse in Ireland, just like it did in the United States in 2002 with the Boston Globe reports, when things exploded in Ireland, the Vatican tapped Dermot Martin, who was working in Geneva, representing the Vatican to the United Nations there, to go back to Ireland to be the Archbishop of Dublin.
Wow.
So he had credibility because he was never part of a cover-up. He was never a bishop there. He had nothing. There's no dirt on him. In other words, no one could say anything bad about Dermot Martin. Okay? But guess what? What did he do when he became the Archbishop of Dublin?
I don't know.
With all of this abuse he confronted, Well, you have to understand, the bishops hated him. You know why?
No.
Again, you had a very difference in sexual orientation between
Oh,
them. Dermot Martin opened up the Vatican, the archives of the Dublin Archdiocese to the Murphy Commission and released 80,000 documents.
wow.
Well,
That's a
and he
no-no.
was very, very much against abuse. He said we will, and he wanted to fire his two auxiliary bishops whom he inherited. The Vatican said, no, you got to keep them.
Hmm.
Well, of course, from that moment on, Dermot Martin's career was stopped. You know, and so when
Yeah.
Francis was making all these cardinals, every time a new conclave was held, he is the Archbishop of Dublin, the largest see in all of Ireland. Nothing comes close to Dublin every time he was passed over by Francis.
Of course.
So what happens when you are someone like Dermot Martin and you address the abuse and you want to get to it, your history, you're gone. Also, before he left office, he refused to send there were quite a number of seminaries throughout Ireland, all over Ireland, right? Then they reduced it to one seminary in the
Yeah.
whole country. But guess what? Dermot Martin did not want to send his seminarians there because he felt it was infested by all these homosexuals who were coming from being put there by all these other, gay bishops. He refused to send his seminarians there. He sent them to the Irish College in Rome. Because he did that, of course, he was not considered a team player, just like Strickland was not seen as a team player. And remember the bishop who was relieved by the Pope, Fernandez Torres in Puerto Rico. What did he do wrong? He also refused to send his seminarians to the interdiocesan seminary that he also felt was infested by a homosexual culture. So you see, if you look at all these bishops who are being thrown out by the Pope, either not promoted like Martin or gotten rid of, you're going to see what the real root of the difference is between, these good priests and bishops and the others. Nobody wants to talk about it. It's the elephant in the room.
Yeah. It doesn't sound good. So, and I don't think I think a lot of Catholics are hoping that when Francis is gone, that there'll be a vast improvement. I don't think so because he's appointed most of the cardinals in the conclave. So whoever the next one is going to be like-minded, and none of them want to open the closet, so to speak, and show the skeletons because they'll be implicated as well.
Of course,
So
which one is not? I mean, how many people look at the American media? Do you think did the American media report how much abuse Bergoglio covered up when he was
no,
the Archbishop of? Did they mention, that before he went to the seminary, he was a bouncer, at a strip bar?
no,
I mean, they're not going to get into, did they say that he was alleged to have had sex, with Jesuit novices in Cordoba?
yeah,
No, they're not going to report. They didn't report any of that.
no,
So are they going to? I mean, how many? Look at the San Diego Tribune and the Times of San Diego. Did they report that McElroy covered up the ritual rape of Rachel Mastrogiacomo, or that McElroy, killed the report that he received from Richard Seip about McCarrick? No, they said nothing about that. They covered it all up.
hmm. Thank you, Gene.
My pleasure.
God bless you.
Be in touch. Keep up the good work.